absolutely real, and it's devastating. And they are dedicated to making a difference, to sharing that pain with as many people as they possibly can, so that people can have the knowledge and have the conversations with their loved ones. And that's what I urge you to do. I cut it off, the video goes a little bit longer. I want you to hear from Laura Bricker-White, who's here as well this morning. And she's going to share her story about her son, Connor, and what her and her family experienced. And there's families like this throughout the entire country. Sure. Yep. Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Even closer. I'll be eating the microphone. Well, hopefully you heard at least some of what I was saying, and we're honored to have Laura here this morning. I'm going to go through some San Diego, what we're seeing in San Diego, but the amount of courage and the strength that Laura and the parents that you just saw, that they have to get up and share that pain with all of you, with the nation, so that they can make a difference. And so what I encourage you to do is find this video, watch it with your loved ones, watch it with your sons and your daughters, your grandkids, and I would say middle school age and up. It's a little heavier for the elementary school, but if you're at middle school, you can handle this, and then have those open conversations with them about drug use and their friends, and talk about how you can avoid taking drugs. And you're going to hear from Bill Purnell later. He's going to talk to you a lot more about interventions directly hands-on, what you can do if you encounter people who are actually suffering from either an overdose or substance use disorders. But as you can see up on the screen, back in 2021, it was the first time we broke 100,000 lives lost to drug overdoses in our nation. First time ever. What I'm showing you here is 2022 numbers, which are unfortunately slightly higher. So over 110,000 people lost their lives to drug overdoses in our country last year. Of those more than 100,000 people, over 80,000 of them lost their lives to an opioid overdose. And then of those opioid overdoses, you can see over 70,000, over 75,000 of those, it was fentanyl or an analog of fentanyl. And so you heard on the documentary, the Dead on Arrival film, they were saying that, hey, it was 50% of the deaths, it's gone up. It's actually closer to 75% of the deaths, overdose deaths, are coming from fentanyl and analogs of fentanyl. The CDC released these stats back in 2021, as we can see here, that top line, that's the #1 cause of death for people between the ages of 18 and 45. That's the prime of life years, right? That's you have a whole future ahead of you years, 18 to 45, and you can see there's nothing else comes close to that. Not car accidents, COVID, cancer, heart disease, nothing comes close to fentanyl and the lives being taken by fentanyl. So looking at what we're seeing here in San Diego County, this is a chart that with data that I received from the medical examiner's office here in San Diego. And you can see the trajectory, the increase in the number of deaths caused by fentanyl. And if we go back to, say, 2016, in 2016 we had 33 deaths caused by fentanyl for the entire year in our county. And just a few years after that, by 2021, we're up to 814 fentanyl-caused deaths. That's a 2,300% increase in the number of deaths. 2022, we just got those numbers. They're still preliminary, but it's looking to have leveled out, and it's about the same as last year. 800 deaths. Kind of put that in context. We all hear about, we're all concerned about, for good reason, violent crime. Violent crime in San Diego County, we have homicides, people that are killed in every manner imaginable, gang violence, domestic violence, guns, knives, any way you can imagine. Those number approximately 100 to 120 a year in San Diego County. Compare that to the 814 that we're seeing from fentanyl. I also looked at the age groups, and what you can see from this chart is this is fentanyl-caused deaths in the different age groups. And it really, the bulk is the 25 to 35-year-olds, but it's amazing how far it extends. No one is safe from this. We have young people. This year, the youngest was 15 years of age. This last year, the youngest was 15 years of age. And it's only by good fortune that we have not had anyone younger. Other parts of the country can't say that. You may have heard recently in New York City, they had a 1-year-old in a daycare center who consumed fentanyl, lost that little boy's life. And then there were 3 others in that same daycare that consumed fentanyl. Their lives were saved because they had naloxone that you're going to hear about. And if you wish to take some, Mr. Perno is going to distribute that later this morning, some Narcan. And that saved those 3 babies, but 1 baby couldn't be saved. So we are at least fortunate in the sense that we haven't had infants in San Diego County. I pray that that continues to be the case, but still a 15-year-old child losing their life. And then the oldest I've seen is 88 years old. We've had people in their 80s and their 70s and their 60s. So no one is immune from this. Let's talk about the kids a little bit more in San Diego County. And so what we saw back in 2020, we had 5 kids under 17 years of age or younger lose their life to fentanyl. Then the next year, unfortunately, that jumped up to a dozen kids. 12 kids in our county lost their life to fentanyl. Fortunately, that number came back down by about 50% decrease to about 6 kids. Last year in San Diego County lost their life. That's 1 kid too many, right? But still, it's good to see that number coming back down. And I think it's because of a lot of the work that a lot of people are doing. There's a lot of education, a lot of these forums, getting out in the community, getting that message out. The naloxone that's being distributed throughout the county is saving lives. The prevention efforts in the schools and in the communities and the churches, all of that is having an impact, and it all has to come together. Public safety, our law enforcement officers intercepting and taking this poison off the street, it's all having an impact. So I sometimes half jokingly about the good old days when I was doing drug prosecution and you'd have to travel maybe to a dangerous part of town and deal with maybe an unknown, potentially dangerous drug dealer if you wanted to score your dope. Those days they're still there, you can do that, but now it's so much easier to get drugs. And that's what's contributing so much to the rise in the deaths. So now, from back alleys to back pockets, what I mean is every single person, every kid who has a phone now has a drug dealer in their pocket. Drug traffickers, as you heard in that video, they're using social media platforms routinely to sell their drugs. Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook Messenger. They're swearing up and down that what they are selling is absolutely legitimate medication. And it's not. We've had cases in our county where we've prosecuted where an individual went so far as to doctor up a laboratory report saying that the medication, the oxycodone that they were selling was legitimate oxycodone, when in fact it was a doctored report and they knew that they were selling counterfeit oxycodone that contained fentanyl. And that person was charged with a murder when the person who bought that pill consumed it and died. So why is fentanyl so dangerous? You got a lot of that from the video. I'll just talk a little bit about some more. I think it's important to touch on the difference between legitimate fentanyl and the illicit fentanyl. Legitimate, I mean the pharmaceutical, the medical grade fentanyl. It's an incredible medication. It's incredibly useful. If any of you had major surgery, chances are really good you've been given fentanyl during that surgery and afterwards to help you recover. For late-stage cancer patients, they're often prescribed fentanyl. People with serious burn patients, given fentanyl to deal with that pain. It's an incredibly useful drug when used properly. But when you have that pharmaceutical-grade fentanyl, it's absolutely controlled. The dosage is controlled and consistent throughout the medication. Anytime we have an FDA-approved medication, it goes through a series of testing. So we'll have months and months of animal studies, followed by months and sometimes years of clinical human trials to make sure the drug is safe, it does what it's supposed to do, and that it's consistent and uniform throughout the application. And so you can see on the lower left-hand side of the screen, there's different, maybe you've heard of fentanyl patches. They get applied to the skin, they absorb the fentanyl slowly into the skin over hours. That you can see next to that, there's this lollipop, that long stick-like looking thing. That's just a lozenge, a lollipop. They just suck on that. And then the other form is the sublingual spray. But if you look closely at these photos, you'll see they're in micrograms. Micrograms. So that's 1,000 of those equal 1 milligram. And what we're seeing in our counterfeit pills are the average counterfeit pill has 2.2 milligrams of fentanyl inside of it. I'll talk about that a little bit more. Along the top, in San Diego, we don't see too much illicit or illegal fentanyl in liquid form, but we do see it, other parts of the country do. We do see it in the powder, primarily that white chunky powder, and then also in the counterfeit pills, made to look exactly like legitimate, generic oxycodone pills. Now we're seeing it more and more in different colors, and you maybe have seen the news about that, but it's fentanyl, and it's incredibly, incredibly dangerous. What you're looking at now on the left-hand side is a FDA-approved laboratory. You have state-of-the-art equipment being used by trained chemists, and they are heavily regulated. What you're looking on the right side of the screen is an actual photo from a clandestine or illegal laboratory in the mountains of Sinaloa, Mexico. And so, unlike all the controls that happen in the FDA labs, you have none of that. In Mexico, where the bulk of this stuff is being made, you have unskilled workers mixing chemicals, the exact composition of which they have no idea. They get their recipes, they put it all together, they mix it, and then they press it into pills, or they form it into powder, and then they move it across the border. And we get hugely varying amounts of fentanyl per pill and in bulk powder. The chocolate chip cookie analogy is one that I love to give because I think it really communicates how dangerous and why it's so dangerous. And maybe you picked up on that a little bit as well already. But when you think of a batch of chocolate chip cookies. Some of those cookies are going to have 6 to 8 chocolate chips. Some are going to have 10 to 12 chocolate chips. And they're never distributed evenly throughout the entire cookie. One part of the cookie might have a whole bunch, the other part might have fewer. And so now, if you imagine those chocolate chips are actually fentanyl, then you get the idea because it's not distributed evenly. So that's why I've seen cases come through my division where we have a grown couple, share a single pill, counterfeit pill, half of a pill. And one dies and one lives. And one got the hot spot where all those, quote, chocolate chips are. The difference, another big difference is you can't smell, taste fentanyl. You're never going to know it's there until it's too late. And that's true for the powder as well. There's increasing potency. The fentanyl, we've been seeing that, tracking that over the years. It's gone up. It's now about 14.4% of the bulk powder coming across Mexico when it's fentanyl is the actual fentanyl. The rest are like sugars primarily. But even that 14.4%, trust me, that is more than enough to do significant harm and cause death. The pills have gone up to 2.2 milligrams per pill is the average. That means some are going to have less, but some are going to have significantly more. And it takes only 2 milligrams on average to kill an average adult. If you're a big person, it might take a little bit more. If you've built up a tolerance to pain medication, it might take a little bit more. If you're a smaller person, you have no experience with opioids, it could take significantly less. But 2 milligrams is the average it takes to kill an adult person. And the average in our pills is 2.2 milligrams now that we're seizing coming across the border. I'll talk just briefly about how it's coming here. 5 minutes. Okay. She's my timer. She puts up her hands. Because I can talk all day until you all fall asleep, wake up, and I'll still be talking. So fentanyl, how it comes into our country. It is primarily coming from, the precursor chemicals are coming from China. They come from China primarily, India to a lesser extent, some other countries, but primarily China. It gets sent to the Pacific ports in Mexico, Manzanillo, Lázaro Cárdenas. Those are the major Pacific ports in Mexico. From there, it goes into staging and processing points in Mexico, Mexico City, Culiacan, Guadalajara. From those staging points, it then moves north, close to the border, where then it's made ready to transport across the border. And what we're seeing is that about 75% of the fentanyl coming into the United States, all the drugs that are coming from Mexico and the United States, they come across legitimate ports of entry. And they're coming through on passenger cars and in the big cargo vehicles that all our produce, so much, millions and millions of dollars worth of produce across every single year into our country. and they follow established routes, drug routes. Most of it is destined to go through San Diego, up to Los Angeles, and then spread out to the Middle East and the East Coast. And the further you get from the border, the higher the profits are for the cartel. But there's a significant amount that stays local here in San Diego. We have a lot, unfortunately, of people that will cross the border and they will pedestrian carry. They will strap it to their bodies, bring it right into our community, and distribute it on our streets. So you have passenger vehicles, you have cargo vehicles, you have people, body carriers we call them, but every other way imaginable. There are semi-submersible submarines. They have drones coming over the border fence. We have tunnels. I was in a tunnel, in a drug tunnel a couple weeks ago with our Homeland Security investigators, going through and seeing how they transport through tunnels underneath the border fence. If you can imagine it, it's being done to get drugs across the border. We are, and we have been trading places, not an honor that we necessarily want, but given our location, we've been trading spots with Arizona, Nogales area, as being the epicenter of fentanyl trafficking into the United States. How did we get here? You've heard some of this, I'm sure, but back in 1990s, it really started with the overprescription of Oxy, the legitimate pain medication, OxyContin primarily. Purdue Pharma is the most famous one, but there are other pharmaceutical companies. And it was built on a bunch of lies that sales reps would give to doctors. So even well-intentioned doctors were overprescribing because they appreciated the dependence and the risk of dependence and addiction that the medication they were prescribing had. That led to millions of people forming addictions to pain medication, to opioids. Regulations came in place that kind of restricted that, and then it became harder to get that. But now you have millions of people out in our communities addicted to pain medicine, and they needed to satisfy that addiction. And so they turned to the black market. At first, it was heroin. Second wave of the opiate epidemic was heroin, the black market. That didn't last very long. And within a few years, it then became fentanyl. And fentanyl now has been for over a decade the primary driver of this wave of addiction. We're now in what I believe to be the fourth wave of the opioid epidemic, and that is fentanyl plus stimulants, and that's methamphetamine primarily, and cocaine as well, but just really methamphetamine and fentanyl. They're driving all the deaths that we're seeing. I'll talk really quick about prevention efforts. I think that's important that you hear that we're doing something about it. And we have an overdose death coordinator who works very closely with the U.S. Attorney's Office. And we have, the DEA has something called the Overdose Response Team. And we've started treating these overdose death scenes as if they're homicides. And so it used to be, you get an overdose, the police roll out, and they see a dead body, and what they say is, oh, unfortunate victim succumbed to their addiction. There'd be a one-page summary report, no real investigation, and therefore no real prosecution. And so now we've changed that model. We have a team that goes out and responds to these deaths, and if it's fentanyl, they will then investigate it as if it's a homicide and try and identify the source of that supply, and more importantly, stop that fentanyl that's already taken a life from continuing on and being sold and taking more lives. It's an incredible model that's being replicated throughout the country, and San Diego is a real leader in those efforts. That's prosecution, and the prosecution, I'm sorry, I said prevention. This is prosecution. HSI has a similar investigative team, and I'm feeling all nervous, like I'm running out of time, and Peggy's gonna get mad at me. But prevention, I'll just summarize it. I think the most exciting thing about prevention, we're doing a lot of stuff you can see up here, but the one thing I want to highlight in prevention work that Summer Stephan is incredibly excited about, that I'm excited about, is our work with San Diego County Office of Education. And we are working with them. We've enlisted the help of prevention scientists, of curriculum and analysts, and we are formulating and identifying evidence-based drug prevention curriculum for implementation into our county schools. And what we have found, what works with our youth, it's not coming in and doing a lecture about fentanyl or any of these other drugs. It's really building these skills that they need to take with them throughout life. It is emotional self-regulation. It is self-confidence. It is communication. It is refusal skills. It's those type of skills that take investment of time and energy from educators with training, using curriculum that has been established and science-based. And so we're taking that and we're going to present that I'm going to be meeting with Summer actually this week, describing what our working group has come up with, and then we'll take next steps, talk about funding and implementation and all that. But I'm incredibly excited to be a part of that. There's a lot more that we're doing. I don't want to take any more time, and I want you to hear from Laura and her incredible story. And thank you, Laura, for being here. And of course, Bill, who's going to talk to you a lot about some very important stuff. So thank you for your time this morning.